The maid switched the prince's cup. He realized that she had saved his life. Before we begin this beautiful period love story, tell me in the comments where you are listening to this a beautiful story from. I love to know where you are joining me from. Isabel entered the great hall through the service door with the tray held steady, as if the whole world depended on her hands not shaking. It wasn't the first time she had seen a banquet, but that night the atmosphere was different. More glances, more whispers, more sparkle in the fabrics of those who could laugh without fear. Behind her, Inés walked with another tray. "Don't even turn around," Inés whispered, clenching her teeth. "Today he's worse." Isabel didn't ask who. She didn't need to. Don Gaspar, the head butler, was at the back near the musicians, and yet his voice seemed to reach everywhere. "Who told you to place that tablecloth like that?" He thundered without raising his voice too much, like someone who commands a room without needing to shout. "Do you want the ladies to think that the palace is run like an inn?" A young maid cringed. Don Gaspar did not even look at her, but at the mistake, as if it had offended the king himself. Isabel continued walking, looked at the floor, counted her steps. She had been taught that if a servant made two mistakes in one night, the palace would find a way to dispense with her quietly. On the left side, the main table awaited Prince Gabriel de Aranda. The place was marked with a slightly taller and finer glass. A small detail, but in the palace, details were orders. Inés managed to brush her elbow. "Isabel, did you see the list?" she whispered. "What list?" "The shift list. They changed it an hour ago. They put me on desserts when I'm always on drinks." Isabel's expression didn't change. She just adjusted the tray. "Who changed it?" Inés grimaced, as if it hurt to say. "Don Gaspar says it was on orders from above, but I don't know. I don't like it." Isabel kept that phrase as if it were a coin. In the palace, things people didn't like usually meant something was coming. They passed a column. On the other side, two footmen were talking, barely moving their lips. "We don't want any mishaps today," said one. "The prince is in a mood," replied the other. "He's always in a mood when people look at him." Isabel thought it was also a warning, although she didn't know what about. Don Gaspar appeared suddenly, as if he had come out of the ground. Isabel stopped immediately. "Yes, sir." He did not say miss or girl. His voice named her as if she were a tool. "That tray is tilted." "No, sir." Don Gaspar reached out his hand, barely touched the edge, and moved it with one finger, enough to make the liquids in a small jug tremble. "It's tilted," he repeated. "And if you spill a drop in front of a countess, you won't get a second chance." Isabel swallowed hard. "I understand, sir." "You understand," said Don Gaspar, tilting his head as if evaluating whether something was worth keeping. "You don't understand anything. You obey." Isabel lowered her gaze even further. "Yes, sir," she replied, adding as she moved a little closer, "Don't even think about improvising. There are rules. There is order. There are hierarchies. If you think you're smart, the palace will crush you." Inés opened her mouth, but Isabel made a small gesture for her not to speak. Don Gaspar left without saying goodbye. Inés exhaled. "She has it in for you," she whispered. "She has it in for all of us," Isabel replied, barely moving her lips. They continued talking. The hall filled with nobles, and with them came the smells of expensive perfumes, freshly worn gloves, and fabrics that had never seen work. The ladies laughed with their hands near their mouths, as if laughter also had etiquette. The gentlemen bowed just enough, no more and no less, so that no one would doubt their rank. Isabel positioned herself behind the service line, near where the bottles were arranged, before moving on to the main table. That was where the heart of the banquet beat, unseen by anyone. A kitchen assistant, Tomas, walked by with a box of glasses. "Be careful," Isabel said quietly, just to avoid an accident. Tomas smiled nervously at her. "If I break one, they'll fire me," he confessed. "Then don't break it," she replied with a calmness she did not feel. Tomas left. Isabel watched as they placed the glasses. Not all of them were the same. The prince's had a slight filigree on the stem. It was subtle, but she had seen it many times, as she was the one who had to polish them when no one else wanted to. The music grew louder, the front door swung open, and a solemn announcement swept through the hall like a wave. His Highness, Prince Gabriel of Aranda. Isabel did not look up, but she did hear the change in the collective breathing, a silence that was not silence, but forced attention. Gabriel entered with a steady gait. He walked neither fast nor slow, but like someone who had learned as a child not to show any emotion. The nobles bowed and the ladies lowered their heads. He responded with a measured bow and continued to his seat. Isabel caught a glimpse of his profile as he sat down. His gaze was alert, as if he were sizing up the room, even as he smiled out of obligation. Inez approached again with a small jug of water. "There he is," she whispered. "They say he doesn't forgive mistakes." "They say many things," Isabel replied. "And what do you say?" Isabel did not answer. She was not there to talk, but to take notes. The first courses were served. The service ran like clockwork. Isabel collected empty glasses, delivered used glasses, and wiped the rims with white cloths without getting her fingers dirty. From time to time, Don Gaspar appeared and disappeared, watching like a hawk. Halfway through dinner, an unfamiliar footman approached the drinks table. This was not unusual, but his uniform looked new. He stopped next to the bottles intended for the main table. Isabel frowned. "Is this your place?" she asked politely, as if she were just checking. The footman looked at her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I work where I do told," he had replied. "Who told you that?" she asked. "Don Gaspar," he replied without hesitation. Isabel looked around for the head butler, but didn't see him. She didn't like that. The footman picked up the bottle that was already prepared for the toast. He moved it with exaggerated care. Then he took out a clean cloth, too clean, and wrapped it around the neck of the bottle as if it were a gesture of respect. Isabel felt a cold tingling in her stomach. That gesture was not one of respect, but of concealment. Inez passed by, and Isabel stopped her for a second with her finger without saying anything. Inez understood the urgency and approached. "What's wrong?" Inez whispered. Isabel didn't want to tell her. If she said it out loud, it would already be inside. "That bottle," she murmured without pointing, "was touched by someone I don't know." Inez looked and swallowed, and Isabel breathed through her nose. She remembered the shift list, the new uniform, and the cloth. "And it doesn't smell like it should," Isabel said very quietly. Inez blinked. "Did you smell it?" "No, not yet." The footman began to pour into a filigree glass. He did it precisely, as if he had practiced. Then he placed the glass on a tray intended for the prince. Isabel moved close enough to catch the scent. It wasn't just wine. She sensed something bitter, something that didn't fit, a smell like poorly mixed herbs. She couldn't be sure, but her instincts were screaming at her. "Isabel!" Inez squeezed her arm. "Don't get involved." Isabel saw the main table and the prince listening to a duke speak to him with a smile that seemed like a challenge. She saw how the glass was waiting for its turn and felt something worse than fear. The certainty that if she was wrong, no one would believe her, and if she was right, no one would believe her either. Don Gaspar finally appeared, walking quickly, as if he knew that time was running out. "Everything is ready for the toast," he announced proudly to a nearby assistant. The unknown footman took a step back, as if he had already done his job and was just waiting to get paid. Isabel didn't think, or she thought so quickly that her thought became action. She took a tray with two identical glasses, one with filigree and the other also with filigree, which had just been served to the main table but had not yet been assigned. The glasses were so similar that a nobleman would not notice. An older butler. Yes, an attentive prince, perhaps. Isabel positioned herself where the service was most intense. She did what she always did. Move forward, stop, turn, and deliver. Only this time her right hand made a small change, an exact exchange, as if she had rehearsed it all her life. The glass intended for the prince remained on the tray for another route. The safe glass was ready to reach the main table. Inez saw it and turned pale. "Isabel," she whispered. "Walk," Isabel ordered her softly. "Walk normally." Inez obeyed as best she could. Don Gaspar was a few steps away. If he turned around, he would catch her. If he didn't, fate would move with them. Isabel advanced toward the main table with the cup held high, without hesitation, feeling the weight of the stairs, even though no one was looking directly at her. In the palace, the maids were invisible until they got in the way. She reached the table, bowed, and placed the glass in front of the prince with the exact gesture she had been taught, neither too close nor too far. Gabriel looked up just as she set the glass down. His eyes rested first on the crystal stem and then on Isabel's fingers. Isabel felt the world closing in on her. He said nothing, just held her gaze a second longer than etiquette allowed. And that was worse than a scream. Isabel lowered her head and withdrew with measured steps. But inside, she was falling apart. She mingled with the line of servants again. Her breathing was controlled. Her heart was a runaway horse. Inés came to her side. "What did you do?" she whispered, terrified. "What I had to do," Isabel said without looking at her. "What if they saw you?" "If they saw me, it doesn't matter what I say now," Isabel replied. Inés wanted to take her hand, but she couldn't. She couldn't do it in front of so many eyes. The music changed. A nobleman stood up with his glass. "To the stability of the kingdom," he said in a pompous voice. More glasses were raised and murmurs filled the room. The court awaited the final signal. The prince's toast. Don Gaspar walked contentedly toward the center. Doña Elvira de Montellano, with her perfect hairstyle and impeccable smile, adjusted her fan and looked toward the main table, as if waiting for a show. Gabriel stood up. Isabel felt her palms burning. The prince took the glass, raised it, and smiled with a serenity that seemed real, although his eyes searched for something among the servants again. Isabel didn't move, didn't breathe. "To His Majesty," said Gabriel, his voice filling the room effortlessly. "To peace in our homes and to loyalty, which is the foundation of all we aspire to be." The glasses clinked with a clear, cheerful sound. Isabel heard the first collective sip as if it were thunder. Gabriel raised the glass to his lips and drank. Nothing happened, nothing visible at least. Doña Elvira's smile didn't change, but her fingers tensed on her fan for a second, as if she had expected something else. Isabel felt the air rush back into her lungs and almost felt dizzy. "He did it," Inés murmured, with a hint of relief. Isabel didn't answer because the worst was yet to come, no one noticing that something had been avoided. Then, near the service area, Tomás, the kitchen assistant, took a glass from a tray so as not to waste what was left. It was a common occurrence, a minor offense punishable by a scolding, nothing more. Tomás took a sip and stood still. He blinked. He touched the edge of the table. "Are you okay?" another assistant asked him. Tomás swallowed and shook his head. "I felt hot," he said, trying to smile. "It's nothing, just air." He didn't fall, there was no drama, but he turned pale and had to sit down on a bench next to the wall, breathing as if the room had become narrower. Don Gaspar finally turned around. "What are you doing sitting down?" he demanded, approaching him with angry steps. "Do you want to ruin the evening?" "I'm sorry, sir. I felt strange," Tomás stammered. "You feel strange when you're not working," Don Gaspar spat, without raising his voice, but with a harshness that left marks of shame. "Get up." Tomás tried and sat back down. An elderly maid approached. "Sir, perhaps you need some water," she said prudently. Don Gaspar clenched his jaw, aware that, although the servants were treated badly, it was not appropriate to make a scene in front of the nobles. "Take him out the back door," he ordered, as if Tomás were an object in the way. "And let no one speak of this, no one." Isabel felt her legs tremble. She wanted to run to Tomás, to tell him that it wasn't his fault, that he had drunk what he shouldn't have, but she couldn't. If she moved, she would give herself away. Inés whispered to her, almost crying, "Isabel, that was it." Isabel cut her off with a glance. She couldn't say it, even there. Gabriel from the main table observed the small commotion. His face remained unchanged for the court, but he set his glass down on the table with excessive precision. Then he spoke to the Duke next to him as if nothing had happened and smiled when appropriate. But his eyes wandered back to the service, to Isabel. Isabel felt a chill run down her spine. The worst part wasn't that he knew. The worst part was that he knew and couldn't tell her without dragging her down. The banquet continued, the music continued, the laughter returned, the nobles exchanged mild gossip, as if the world weren't hanging by a thread. Isabel continued to serve. Every step was a great effort. Every glass she served seemed like a threat. She didn't look at the footman in his new uniform, but she could feel him nearby, like a shadow that had done its job. During the change of courses, Isabel was sent to collect the empty glasses from the main table. Something normal, expected, and that shouldn't have frightened her. She approached, lowered her head, and took a glass, then another. Her fingers weren't shaking, or at least that's what she wanted to believe. When she turned to leave, a voice, barely a whisper, stopped her. "Don't look," said the voice. Isabel knew from the tone that it was not Don Gaspar, but Gabriel. Her throat tightened. "Your Highness," she managed to say in a whisper. "Silence," he ordered gently, as if the word were a protection. "Walk." Isabel took 2 steps with the tray in her hands. She felt him come close enough for his voice to reach her without anyone else hearing. "Why did you do it?" Gabriel asked very quietly. Isabel swallowed. She didn't want to answer. An answer was a thread that anyone could pull. "I don't know what your Highness is talking about," she said, obedient to the lie that the palace demanded. Gabriel let out a short exhalation like a humorless laugh. "Yes, you do," he replied. "I saw you." Isabel felt her vision blur for a moment. She didn't cry. She couldn't. "It was a mistake," she murmured. "It wasn't a mistake," he said, his voice growing deeper. "It was a risk, and no one takes risks like that by accident." Isabel gripped the tray tightly. "I'm just serving, and yet you decided," Gabriel said. She didn't answer because if she told the truth, everything would fall apart. Gabriel lowered his voice even more. "Listen to me carefully." Isabel felt the whole room recede as if at that moment only that voice and her fear existed. "If you leave this room alone, they will hold you responsible. Stay close and don't tell anyone what you saw." Isabel continued walking with the tray as if nothing had happened. The prince's whisper still vibrated in her ear, and that made her more nervous than the incident with Tomas. "Don't look. Walk. Don't tell anyone." She obeyed because in the palace, obeying was like breathing. Inés approached her as soon as she could, squeezing into the small space between 2 columns where no one important ever stopped. "What did he say to you?" Inés asked, her eyes wide. "Nothing," Isabel replied without looking at her. "Isabel, nothing that can be repeated," Inés corrected, clenching her jaw. Inés swallowed hard. "So yes, it was what we thought." Isabel closed her fingers around the edge of the tray. "Shut up," she whispered. "The walls have ears here." Inés lowered her gaze. The two continued serving and collecting cutlery as if their world were not hanging by a thread. Doña Elvira de Montellano rose from her seat with the elegance of someone who never rushes. She approached a neighboring table, greeted a marquis, and then a countess. As she moved back and forth, her eyes rested for a moment on the staff, not on the trays, but on their hands and faces. Isabel felt that gaze like a chill on the back of her neck. Doña Elvira didn't need to shout to hurt someone. A mere hint was enough. Don Gaspar, meanwhile, moved like a homeowner watching over his house. He stopped by the drinks table, spoke quietly to the footman in his new uniform, and gave him an order that Isabel couldn't hear. The footman nodded without looking at anyone. Isabel wanted to go closer to listen, but she remembered the prince's words. "Don't move. Don't peek. Stay close." Close to what? To him? To the table? To her own doom? Gabriel sat back down and resumed his conversation with a nobleman to his right. He smiled, nodded, and said the right thing at the right time, but every now and then he glanced up at the service, as if counting who was coming and going. Isabel couldn't understand how he could do 2 things at once, be a prince and at the same time act as a silent guard. Dinner continued until the last course was cleared away and the ladies began to leave with their fans closed, as if they too were closing the chapter on the evening. The gentlemen stayed a little longer, talking about things that were never said aloud, but were evident in the way they bowed to each other. When the music finally changed and the movement in the hall slowed down, Don Gaspar clapped his hands sharply. "Service," he said. With a single word, the staff knew that the evening was not over. To the back room. Now Inés approached Isabel with short steps. "They're going to question us," she whispered. "They're going to blame us," Isabel corrected. They crossed the service hallway, passed through an inconspicuous door, and arrived at a long room where tablecloths and trays were stored. It smelled of soap and dampness, and the silence was different from that in the ballroom. It was the silence of people who know they can lose everything with one wrong word. Don Gaspar stood in the center. To one side, two service supervisors avoided looking the maids in the eye, as if doing so would be an admission that they too were afraid. Tomas was no longer there. No one asked about him because to ask was to point fingers. One by one, Don Gaspar ordered, you are going to tell me who took what, who served what, and who dared to change the order I gave. An older maid tried to speak. Sir, it was a minor incident. The boy got dizzy. Minor. Don Gaspar raised an eyebrow. It would be minor if the dizziness had occurred in front of His Highness. It would be minor if someone were clumsy enough to spill a glass at the main table. In this palace, a misstep is not a minor thing. A misstep is a disgrace. No one breathed heavily. Don Gaspar walked in front of the rows as if inspecting animals. Who had touched the toast bottle, he asked. At first, no one answered. Then a trembling hand rose, that of a familiar footman. I, sir, brought it to the table, but I did not serve. Who served? The familiar footman looked at the other one, the one in the new uniform. The new one also raised his hand calmly. I did, sir, as you ordered. Don Gaspar looked at him with approval, almost with pride. Very well, then you stay here. Then he turned to the women who were standing near the tray intended for the main table. There was an uncomfortable silence. Isabel felt her heart rise to her throat. Inés took a small step, as if to cover her with her body, but it was useless. Don Gaspar fixed his gaze on Isabel. You, he said, as if he had been waiting for this moment. Isabel, who always believed she went unnoticed, stepped forward. Isabel pressed her lips together. Yes, sir. She took 2 steps. She felt everyone's eyes on her. They were not judgmental looks, but looks of fear, because if she was chosen, perhaps the others would be spared. Don Gaspar crossed his hands behind his back and asked, What did you do during the toast? Isabel held his gaze just long enough not to appear insolent or guilty. It was a fine line. I served the appropriate drink, sir, she said. The appropriate drink, Don Gaspar repeated, his tone becoming dangerous. Do you know what bothers me about you, Isabel? You talk as if you know everything. A maid doesn't know. A maid obeys orders. Yes, sir. Then tell me, he insisted, who gave you permission to come closer to the main table than necessary? Isabel felt her ears burning. She couldn't say, The prince spoke to me. That would be signing her own death warrant. No one gave me permission, sir, she replied. No one gave me permission, sir, she replied. I was just doing my job. Don Gaspar leaned in slightly, bringing his face closer. And does your job include making decisions? No, sir. Then straightening up, she said, Your job includes obeying the order of service. And a great commotion ensued. Isabel did not answer. Don Gaspar walked over to an empty tray, touched it with his fingertips, and then wiped his hands as if the tray had dirtied them. There was a dizzy spell, he said, as if he barely remembered it. A boy was feeling ill. That raises questions, and when there are questions, the palace seeks answers. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Do you understand that a maid can be the most convenient scapegoat? Inés gasped, but held back. Isabel felt a pang of shame, not because she didn't know this, but because hearing it like this was like swallowing a nail. Yes, sir, she repeated. Don Gaspar smiled slightly. Very well. For now, you will not leave the service area alone. Isabel looked up for a moment. I'm sorry, sir. Don't play the victim, he said, and then he let the contempt slip. Don't pretend, innocent one. I saw you hanging around where you shouldn't have been. If it turns out that someone has been tampering with drinks, I need to know. And if you know something and you hide it, then you're putting yourself in a tight spot. Isabel felt her throat close up. She wanted to say, I don't tamper, I just saw, but she couldn't. The nearest supervisor cleared his throat. Mr. Gaspar, he said cautiously, perhaps it would be best to let the staff rest. It's been a long night. Don Gaspar looked at him as if the supervisor had just disrespected him. Now you're teaching me how to run the service. They're not leaving until I say so. The maids bowed their heads and the footmen clenched their fists. No one moved. Then there was a soft knock on the door. It was not a loud knock, but a call for attention that demanded effortless obedience. Everyone turned around. A protocol guard poked his head in respectfully without entering completely. "Excuse me," he said. "His Highness requests the head butler." Don Gaspar stood up straight and adjusted his jacket, as if he had been ready all along. "Now?" he asked, his voice suddenly submissive. "Now," confirmed the guard. Don Gaspar did not dare refuse. He turned to the staff and his gaze fell once again on Isabel. "This isn't over," he said without moving his lips much. Isabel looked down. "Yes, sir." When Don Gaspar left, the room breathed for the first time. Inés approached Isabel as soon as she could. "Does he want to hang you?" she whispered. "I know, and Prince," Isabel replied. Inés hesitated, as if uttering the word Prince was too much for them. "Is he going to help you?" Isabel thought about the whisper behind her. "Don't tell anyone." "I don't know, but he knows." Inés pressed her lips together. "That doesn't always save you." A supervisor raised his hands. "You've heard him," he said, trying to sound firm. "No one says anything. No one repeats anything. Get back to your closing tasks." Everyone dispersed like shadows. Isabel and Inés returned to the service quarter, where the echoes of the party could still be heard in the distance. They loaded trays, folded tablecloths, and stored glasses in boxes. Everything had to be perfect so that the palace would wake up as if the night had been flawless. As she arranged a row of glasses, Isabel noticed something. "The footman in the new uniform is gone. Did you see him?" Isabel whispered to Inés. "Who?" "The new one." Inés looked around. "No." Isabel felt a twinge of pain. He left as if nothing had happened. Inés clenched her teeth. Maybe he was sent somewhere else. "Maybe," said Isabel, but she didn't believe it. She heard quick footsteps approaching down the hall. Isabel tensed, but it wasn't Don Gaspar. It was the same protocol guard who had called the head butler. He stopped respectfully in front of them, looking at the floor, as if refusing to look too closely. "Isabel," he said quietly. She froze. "Yes, by order of His Highness," he began and paused as if it pained him to say it. "You are to be temporarily reassigned." Inés's eyes widened. "Reassigned?" Isabel repeated, carefully controlling her tone. The guard nodded. "To the prince's service wing, to the main kitchen, in the pantry. Under direct supervision." Isabel understood the game without anyone explaining it to her. Direct supervision meant they were going to keep her close, either to protect her or to watch her, or both. Inés took a step toward her, but the guard raised a hand signaling for silence. "The orders come with a seal," he said. "They are not to be questioned. You report at dawn, and you are not to leave the palace tonight." Isabel felt her legs go weak, but she held herself steady. "Yes," she replied. "I obey." The guard left just as quickly. Inés clung to her as if she were afraid they would take her away at that moment. "That's strange," said Inés. "Why you?" Isabel placed a glass in a box with excessive care. "Because I was where I shouldn't have been," she murmured. "But that sounds like punishment. It also sounds like salvation," said Isabel, not wanting to say it. Inés looked at her. "Salvation for whom?" Isabel didn't answer. The night ended late. When they finally left the Immaculate Hall, the staff dispersed to their respective areas. Isabel walked toward the hallway leading to the staff quarters, her body tired but her mind awake, as if it were noon. In a corner, two cooks were talking in low voices. "They say the prince has sent for the butler," said one. "They say it was because of the dizziness," replied the other. "And if it was the wine—" Isabel continued without turning around. She didn't want to be associated with rumors. She reached the break area. It was a shared room with cots, trunks, and a lamp that barely provided any light. Inés came in with her and closed the door. For the first time in hours, Inés exhaled sharply. Isabel said pleadingly, "Tell me the truth. Did you change anything?" Isabel stood still. If she said yes, Inés would have everything. If she said no, Inés would think she was crazy. And if Inés talked to someone out of fear, everything would be ruined. Isabel sat on the edge of the bed and removed the cloth from her shoulder. "I just did what I thought was right," she said at last. Inés put her hand to her mouth. "Holy Mary, lower your voice," Isabel asked. "Do you realize?" Inés sat across from her, her face pale. If someone accuses you, no one will believe you. Isabel looked down. I know, then why did you do it? Isabel pressed her lips together. She didn't want to say it out loud because in doing so, it would become real. Because he smelled bad, she said, and she felt her chest tighten. Because that footman wasn't from here. Because the shift schedule had changed. Because I saw him at the cup. Saw what? Isabel hesitated. I don't know. For sure, she admitted, but it wasn't normal. Inés trembled. And the prince saw you. Isabel nodded slightly. He saw me. Inés opened her hands. Then he can save me, said Isabel, and the phrase sounded strange to her. Or he can ruin me if someone forces him to. Inés shook her head. A prince doesn't get involved with a maid. Isabel looked at her wearily. Today he got involved even though he didn't want to. Inés bit her lip. Did he say anything else? Isabel remembered the voice she had heard behind her. Stay close. He didn't lie. He just ordered me not to move. Inés lowered her head, defeated. This is going to end badly. Isabel stood up. No, if I stay alive within the rules, she said, although she didn't sound very confident. Inés looked at her sadly. The rules always bend for those at the top. Isabel had no answer, because it was true. Some time passed. Inés fell asleep from exhaustion. Isabel, on the other hand, couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the cup and the footman's expression. She saw Don Gaspar's gaze. She saw Doña Elvira's quiet smile. She got up slowly so as not to wake anyone. She went out into the hallway with a small lamp that she covered with her hand. She shouldn't be walking alone, but she couldn't stay without checking something that was burning inside her. She walked towards the drinks area, now deserted. She wanted to see if there was any sign, any residue, anything that would give her certainty. Not out of curiosity, but out of self-defense. The place was dark. The bottles were no longer on the table. They had been put away. The trays were stacked up. The floor was clean, but not perfect. In the palace, perfection rarely existed. What existed was what could be hidden. Isabel crouched down next to the corner where the special glasses had been placed. She ran her fingers along the edge of the table. There was nothing, just fine dust. Then she saw something between a table leg and the wall. It was a small object that reflected the light from the lamp. She moved closer. It was a brooch or a medallion with a minimal relief. It was not from the service. No maid had anything like it. It had a miniature seal, elegant, typical of a noble house. Isabel felt her stomach sink. What are you doing here? She murmured without realizing it. She picked it up between her fingers. It weighed more than she expected. She turned it slightly and saw the engraved detail. An initial and a symbol she had seen before in documents she wasn't supposed to see while helping to clean certain rooms. She didn't remember the full name, but she did remember that symbol. It belonged to someone close to the main table. Isabel wanted to leave it there, pretend she hadn't seen it, but then she understood something clearly. If she left it, whoever had lost it could come back and pick it up without any problems. And if she picked it up, at least she would have a piece of the truth, even if that truth hurt her. She tucked it into her apron, under the cloth, so it wouldn't be noticed. As she straightened up, the lamp trembled slightly in her hand, and then she heard a faint sound behind her. The wood of a door opening slowly. Isabel froze and turned her head just enough. In the doorway, half his face illuminated by the light, stood Don Gaspar, staring at her as if he had seen her every move. Don Gaspar did not come in completely. He remained in the doorway, as if the hallway and the night belonged to him. What are you doing here? He asked with a calmness that reassured no one. Isabel held the lamp firmly. She felt the medallion hidden against her abdomen, as if it weighed twice as much. I went to check that everything was clean, sir, she replied. At this hour, I was sent to get the trays ready for dawn, she lied without changing her tone. She didn't want anything to be missing. Don Gaspar took a step into it and the floor creaked. How diligent, he said. It almost seems like you're looking for something. Isabel swallowed hard. I'm looking to avoid being scolded, sir. Don Gaspar tilted his head. Ah, of course, you always want to avoid scolding. His voice softened. Tell me, Isabel, what did the prince order you? The lamp shook a little. Isabel held it tighter. He didn't speak to me, sir. No. Don Gaspar smiled slightly. I saw you near his table, and I have eyes, unlike you people, who only see what suits you. Isabel kept her eyes down, as she had been taught. He was just collecting glasses, sir. Don Gaspar moved close enough for her to smell his cologne. He smelled clean, but his presence was dirty. Listen to me carefully, he said without raising his voice. When there's an incident in this palace, the people at the top want a story, a simple story, and a simple story always needs someone like you. Isabel pressed her lips together. Yes, sir, but if you help me, he continued, if you tell me who dared to change the order of the toast, I can make your story less painful. Isabel felt a twinge in her chest. I don't know anything, sir. Don Gaspar clicked his tongue in disappointment. Lying doesn't suit you, he said. You stiffen, you breathe differently, and by the way, you shouldn't breathe so heavily when you're alone. Isabel didn't respond. Don Gaspar reached out his hand toward her, not to touch her, but to point to the lamp. Turn that off, he ordered. You are not allowed to wander around here. Isabel obeyed. She blew out the flame carefully. Darkness covered the drinks table, and for a second she felt her heart skip a beat. Now, said Don Gaspar, go back to your room and don't you dare talk to anyone. Yes, sir. Isabel took one step, then another, taking care not to let the medallion move. Isabel, Don Gaspar stopped her. She froze. Yes, sir. Turn around, he ordered. Isabel turned slowly. In the dim light coming from the hallway, Don Gaspar's eyes were shining, as if he were enjoying himself. If you are keeping something that does not belong to you, you had better get rid of it before dawn, because tomorrow it will not be me asking questions. Tomorrow it will be others. Isabel felt a knot in her stomach. I am not keeping anything, sir. Don Gaspar smiled more. We'll see, he murmured. Go. Isabel left with measured steps. She didn't run until she turned the corner and made sure no one was following her. Then she walked quickly, without losing her composure, the medallion beating like a living secret. When she entered the room, Inez sat up suddenly. Where were you? She whispered, frightened. Isabel closed the door carefully. Be quiet, said Don Gaspar. He saw me. Inez put her hand to her mouth. Did he follow me? Isabel didn't answer and took the medallion out of her apron. Inez looked at it as if it were a snake. What is that? Something that shouldn't be there, said Isabel. Inez shook her head. That belongs to someone higher up. That's why I took it. That's why they're going to blame you, Inez said, trembling. Isabel tucked it deeper inside. They won't find it, she said, though she wasn't convinced. Inez looked at her desperately. And what are you going to do with it? Isabel took a deep breath. Survive and find out who wanted that cup to reach the prince, she replied bluntly. Inez sat down on the cot as if her legs no longer responded to her. We don't understand these things, Isabel murmured, staring at her. I shouldn't either, but I'm already in. The early morning passed like a tense thread. Isabel barely closed her eyes. When the first stirrings of the palace awakened the hallways and kitchens, she was already up, her hair combed, wearing a clean apron, her face serene. Inez accompanied her to the main service corridor. Today you're going to the prince's wing, she whispered. Don't stray from the others. Isabel nodded. And if they ask you questions, I'll say as little as possible, she replied. Inez grabbed her arm tightly. Isabel, don't try to be brave. Isabel held her gaze. I already did that last night, she replied in a low voice. Now it's time to be smart. They walked to the assigned area. The prince's wing was reached through cleaner corridors, where the staff walked more stiffly and spoke less. The supervisor was another older woman with a face that showed she didn't trust anyone. Her name was Mathilde. Are you Isabel? She asked without greeting her. Yes, ma'am. Mathilde evaluated her from head to toe. There are no distractions here, she said. Here, we work and keep quiet. If His Highness wants water, he wants it now. If he asks for wine, it is served according to protocol. And if anything unusual happens, you don't make anything up. Understood? Understood, Isabel replied. Mathilde gestured toward a corner. You will stay in the pantry and help with the trays. No one enters without my knowledge. Isabel nodded. That sounded like surveillance, but also protection. At least Don Gaspar had no direct control over that place. A young footman approached Mathilde and spoke to her in a low voice. Mathilde frowned and then looked at Isabel. "There is an audience today," she announced. Isabel felt a blow to her chest. "An audience, ma'am, a meeting," Mathilde explained, as if she were talking to someone who didn't understand the world. "To clarify, those above want there to be no rumors," and she looked at her with a sharp edge. "You will be available." Isabel looked down. "Yes, ma'am." By mid-morning, rumors were already running through the staff, although no one was saying them out loud. A maid brought bread and said, "They say the prince is upset." Another replied, "They say Doña Elvira asked for an explanation." Mathilde banged her knuckles on the table. "Nothing is said here," she ordered, "especially if you don't know." Isabel worked quickly, arranging jars and checking cloths. Her mind, however, was in turmoil. The medallion was still hidden. She had the feeling that everyone could smell it, even though no one could see it. Shortly before noon, two protocol guards arrived in the service area. "Isabel," one of them said gently, "come." Mathilde frowned. "She's working." "The summons is formal," replied the guard. "It's not optional." Mathilde looked at Isabel as if she wanted to warn her without words. She finally said, "And don't say more than you have to." Isabel followed the guards through corridors that smelled of incense and paper. They did not take her to the great hall, but to an elegant secondary room with chairs lined up. There were some nobles sitting there in a comfortable position as if they were going to watch a short show. Doña Elvira was in the center with her fan closed on her lap. Next to her was an older man with the face of an advisor, and in the back, standing, Don Gaspar, with impeccable posture. Isabel felt her skin bristle. They made her stand alone in front of them. "Your name?" the advisor asked emotionlessly. "Isabel," she replied. "Isabel Rojas." Doña Elvira tilted her head as if savoring the sound. "Isabel," she repeated softly. "What a simple name." Isabel clenched her fingers under her apron. The advisor spoke. "Last night there was an incident during the toast. A member of the service became indisposed." Isabel did not move her face. "Yes, sir," Doña Elvira smiled. "How delicate," she said. "Dizziness can be caused by heat, nerves, or clumsiness." Don Gaspar intervened immediately. "It was clumsiness," he said. The advisor raised a hand to silence him. "It will be clarified," he said. Then he looked at Isabel. "You were assigned to glasses and trays near the main table." "Yes, sir." "Who gave you that assignment?" Isabel thought quickly. If she said Don Gaspar, it would sound like an accusation. If she said Matilda, it would implicate her. If she said Don Gaspar, it would sound like an accusation. "The shift was on the list," she replied. "Don Gaspar." He smiled with satisfaction, as if that sentence confirmed that everything was under control. Doña Elvira let out a slight sigh. "Lists change," she commented, "sometimes out of necessity and sometimes on a whim." Isabel felt as if she were being tied up with a rope without anyone touching her. The advisor crossed his fingers. "Explain to me, Isabel," he said. "Did you notice anything unusual in the toast service?" Isabel swallowed. "No, sir." Don Gaspar let out a short chuckle. "Of course not," he said. "A maid doesn't notice anything, she just gets in the way." Isabel looked down for a second and then looked up again, just enough so as not to appear defeated. Doña Elvira watched her as if she were a curious insect and added, "She was very close to His Highness, and His Highness is an attentive man." The advisor turned his face toward the back. "Is the prince present?" A voice answered from the door, firm and calm. "I am here." "I am here." Isabel felt her pulse racing in her neck. Gabriel entered with a confident stride. He wore no crown or anything extravagant, but his presence made everyone sit up straight. Even Doña Elvira changed her posture, as if suddenly remembering what she should and should not do. "Your Highness," said the advisor, rising. "No need," replied Gabriel. His voice was kind, but it brooked no reply. "I was told you wanted clarity. I agree." Doña Elvira smiled sweetly. "We only want to protect the palace's reputation," she said. "You know how rumors spread." "Rumors feed on untruths," Gabriel replied politely. Isabel clenched her jaw to hide her emotions. Gabriel looked at Isabel for just a moment, long enough for her to feel that she was not alone, but not long enough to give himself away. "Continue," Gabriel said. The advisor coughed uncomfortably. Isabel says she didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. Don Gaspar insists there was disorder. Doña Elvira bowed her head. I just want to understand why a maid was so close at such a delicate moment, Gabriel said. Gabriel said, sitting down without asking permission, and that single action changed the atmosphere. Because it was her job, Gabriel replied. Or do servants now choose where to work according to the lady's preferences? Doña Elvira opened her fan slowly as if the gesture calmed her. I would never imply that, she said. I'm just intrigued. Don Gaspar seized the moment. Your Highness, he said reverently, with your permission, it is necessary to check that no one has taken any improper drinks. That no one has taken any improper drinks? Gabriel asked, looking directly at him. Don Gaspar hesitated. That no one has altered the protocol, he said. Gabriel held his gaze. If you have an accusation, express it. If not, don't dirty the room with insinuations. Don Gaspar swallowed hard. Doña Elvira intervened gently. A discreet review of the staff would be prudent, she suggested. Just for peace of mind, a little order never hurt anyone. Isabel felt her stomach turn. Review. That was the medallion. That was the end. The advisor nodded as if he had already thought of it. The belongings of the staff assigned to the toast will be reviewed, he announced. It's procedure. Isabel felt the room closing in on her, but she kept her face calm. Inside, she was screaming. Gabriel leaned back in his chair and spoke calmly. Procedure, he repeated. Interesting. Since when is procedure followed in the presence of noble witnesses? If you are so concerned about the palace's reputation, this is precisely what tarnishes it. Doña Elvira closed her fan with a soft snap. You're exaggerating, she said sweetly. Gabriel did not raise his voice. I take care of what you would do well to forget, he replied. If you want to review the service, do so discreetly and under my supervision, but not here. Don Gaspar tensed. Your Highness. I decide, Gabriel interrupted him. His tone was not rude, just definitive. Besides, the staff in the prince's wing is under someone else's control. Not yours, Don Gaspar. Isabel felt the air returning, but with a bitter taste. Gabriel was saving her. Yes, but that exposed her. Doña Elvira looked at him with a quiet smile. How thoughtful, she said. I'm touched. Gabriel did not respond to the irony and looked at the advisor. Leave this for today, he ordered. And if you need to talk to me, not her. The advisor nodded nervously. As you say, Your Highness. Doña Elvira rose slowly. Isabel, she said, her voice sounding almost affectionate. How fortunate you are. Not everyone receives so much attention. Isabel bowed her head. Thank you, ma'am, she replied, because etiquette allowed her nothing else. Doña Elvira moved close enough so that only Isabel could hear her. In this palace, attention comes at a price, she whispered. Isabel felt a chill. Doña Elvira walked away with calm steps. Don Gaspar stayed a second longer, staring at Isabel as if he wanted to pierce her with his gaze. Then he left. The advisor dismissed everyone with a gesture. The nobles murmured as they left, happy to have something to talk about at home. Isabel did not move until the room was almost empty. Only Gabriel and a guard of protocol remained. Gabriel waited for the guard to take a step back, just enough so he could not hear anything. Breathe, he said softly to Isabel. Isabel let out a sudden breath as if she had been holding it all morning. Your Highness, she began, but didn't know what to say. Don't thank me, Gabriel interrupted. Here, thanks are charged. Isabel finally looked up. Then why? She asked with a courage that surprised even herself. Gabriel stared at her. Because last night someone wanted to make me look ridiculous, he said. Then he lowered his voice even further. Oh, worse. And you saw it before anyone else did. Isabel felt her eyes burn, but she didn't cry. I just swallowed hard. I just noticed something strange. Gabriel nodded. And yet you moved, he said. You didn't act to gain something. You acted to lose everything. Isabel pressed her lips together. I didn't think. She lied. Gabriel let out a short exhalation. That's not true, he said. You thought faster than everyone else sitting there. Isabel looked down. Don Gaspar wants to blame me, she murmured. Don Gaspar obeys someone, Gabriel replied. Isabel felt her skin grow cold. Who? Gabriel didn't answer right away. He looked toward the door where Doña Elvira had left. I don't know yet, he finally said, but I know you're in danger. Isabel pressed her apron against her body without realizing it. Me. Her words caught in her throat. She couldn't tell him about the medallion. She couldn't tell him she had it hidden. She couldn't tell him anything without breaking the rule that kept her alive. Gabriel watched her as if he could sense her inner struggle. Listen to me, he said firmly. Don't talk to anyone, not Inés, not Matilda, no one. Isabel tensed. Inés isn't bad, she said almost defensively. I didn't say she was, Gabriel replied. I said that fear loosens tongues. And in the palace, a loose tongue can destroy a reputation without lifting a finger. Isabel lowered her head. Yes, Your Highness. Gabriel took a step toward her, keeping a safe distance to avoid rumors. Why did you do it? He asked. And now his voice sounded different. Not like a prince, but like a man. Give me a reason that's yours, not the one you were taught. Isabel was silent for a second because she finally said, I've seen what happens when someone stays silent, and last night I couldn't. Gabriel looked at her with something resembling respect. Then I won't leave you alone, he said. And before she could respond, he added curtly, but that doesn't mean you should trust everyone. Isabel nodded, though inside she was trembling. At that moment, a guard approached and interrupted her. His Highness is waiting for you, he said. Gabriel straightened up. The mask returned to its place. Perfect. Go with Matilde, he ordered Isabel, and don't stray from the assigned area. Isabel obeyed. As she left, she noticed them staring at her. Attention is hard to come by, Doña Elvira had said, and now everyone had seen that the prince had spoken up for her. When she returned to the service wing, Matilde greeted her with a stony face. What did you say? She asked immediately. Nothing, Isabel replied. I just answered what I was asked. Matilde looked at her as if she wanted to believe her. Then why did the prince defend you? She blurted out bluntly. Isabel pressed her lips together. I don't know, ma'am. Matilde clicked her tongue. Of course you know, she muttered. Then she raised a finger. But if you want to keep your head on your shoulders, don't repeat it. Isabel lowered her gaze. Yes, ma'am. Matilda sent her to fold cloths on a long table. Inés appeared a little later with a tray of bread. Her eyes immediately sought out Isabel. What happened? She whispered as she set down the tray. Isabel shook her head slightly. Not here, she said. Inés clenched her jaw and nodded, swallowing her questions. The hours passed at a strange pace. Isabel worked and, at the same time, felt that someone was watching her from somewhere. She didn't know if it was Don Gaspar, Doña Elvira, or the entire palace. At dusk, Matilda left for a moment to check the pantry. Isabel took the opportunity to tidy up the folded cloths in a cupboard, ran her hands through the clean fabrics, and then noticed something different. A piece of paper. It wasn't a cloth or a list, but a folded note, hidden where only the servants could reach. Isabel took it out without Inés seeing. The paper was thin and the handwriting elegant. She opened it carefully and her heart leapt into her throat as she read it. Return the seal to me before nightfall, or I will have you made homeless in this city. Isabel refolded the note with hands that no longer obeyed her as they once had. The paper seemed light, but it weighed like a sentence. She looked around. No one was looking directly at her, but in the palace that meant nothing. Inés approached with a small jug. What do you have there? She whispered. Nothing, Isabel replied too quickly. Inés frowned. Isabel. Isabel tucked the note into her apron, between the fabric and her body, where the sweat immediately warmed it. Later, she said, no, here. Inés wanted to insist, but the appearance of Mathilde at the end of the hallway and the supervisor's gaze were enough to cut off any conversation. Is dinner ready? Mathilde asked without greeting anyone. Yes, ma'am, Isabel replied. Mathilde approached and checked everything with her dry fingers, as if the dust were a personal offense. Today you've brought eyes with you, she said suddenly, without looking at her. And when you bring eyes with you, service becomes cruel. Isabel swallowed. I just work, she said. Mathilde laughed without humor. No one here just works, she replied. Here one survives. Isabel lowered her gaze. Mrs. Mathilde? Mathilde raised a hand as if she didn't want to hear any pleas. Don't say anything to me, she said. I don't want names. I don't want secrets. I didn't put you here. But you're here now, and since you're here, you better understand this. Some people fall with dignity, and some people fall kicking and screaming. It's in your best interest not to kick and scream. Isabel pressed her lips together. You're telling me to give up. Mathilde finally looked at her. I'm telling you to measure every word because your tongue is the only thing they can't take away from you without you giving it to them, she replied. Isabel felt the note burning her stomach. She remembered the phrase, return the seal to me before nightfall. Nightfall, she murmured unintentionally. Mathilde raised an eyebrow. What did you say? Nothing, ma'am. Mathilde watched her for a second longer and then gestured toward the linen area. Stay here, she ordered, and if anyone comes looking for you, tell me first. Yes, ma'am. Mathilde walked away. Inés waited until they were alone, although in reality they never were. Isabel, you're scaring me, she whispered. Isabel took a deep breath and without taking out the paper, murmured softly, Does anyone know I have the medallion? Inés froze. What? They left me a note, said Isabel. Inés put her hands to her mouth. My God, who doesn't say so, replied Isabel. But she said it as if she were in charge and knew what she was doing. Inés trembled. Give it back, she said urgently. Give it back now, it's not worth it. Isabel shook her head slowly. If I return it without knowing to whom, I'll get myself into more trouble, she said. And if I return it to the person who asked for it, I'll be left with nothing. Inés looked at her with teary eyes. So what are you going to do? Isabel clenched her jaw. Tell the truth, she replied, and felt the words come out like a leap into the void. Inés opened her eyes wide. To whom? Isabel hesitated for a second, but she already knew the answer from the moment the prince defended her. To him, she said. Inés grabbed her arm. To the prince. Isabel, no, that will destroy you. Isabel held her friend's gaze. They're already trying to destroy me, she said. They just haven't succeeded yet. Inés let go of her arm as if it were burning her. What if he uses you? She whispered. What if he just keeps you around so he doesn't look bad and then drops you? Isabel pressed her lips together. Then I'll fall knowing the truth, she replied. Not like an obedient fool. Inés shook her head in despair. You're going to make enemies of important people. I already have, said Isabel. Mathilde returned to the hallway and the two women fell silent. Mathilde said nothing, but her gaze swept over their faces as if reading their fear. The afternoon passed with brief orders, trays, cloths, calaos coming and going. Isabel felt the note burning her. Dusk was approaching, and with it, the promise of being left homeless, jobless, with nothing. As the sun began to set, a protocol guard arrived at the prince's service area. Isabel Rojas, he announced. Isabel straightened up. The prince requests your presence in the secondary library, said the guard. Mathilde stepped forward. For what reason? She asked coldly. On duty, replied the guard without flinching. Protocol check. Open doors. Remote surveillance. Mathilde pressed her lips together as if that would take away her arguments. Go, she said at last, lowering her voice so that only Isabel could hear her. And come back in one piece, Oento. Isabel nodded. Inés looked at her as if it were going to be the last time. Be careful, she whispered. Isabel pressed her fingers together once in a silent promise and followed the guard. The secondary library was smaller and less ostentatious. There were two assistants, some distance away, arranging papers, and that was what protocol required to avoid rumors. Gabriel was standing next to a table with a closed book in front of him, as if the book were just an excuse to be there. When Isabel entered, the guard remained near the door, not looking directly at her. Gabriel did not come too close, just looked at her calmly. Thank you for coming, he said. Isabel lowered her head. His Highness summoned me. Yes, he replied, and not on a whim. Isabel felt her throat go dry. She began and stopped. Gabriel watched her for a moment. Are your hands shaking? He said, as if he could see it in her fingers. What happened? Isabel clutched her apron. They left me a note, she finally said in a low voice. Gabriel's expression didn't change, but his gaze became more intense. Who? I don't know, but it says to return a seal. Before nightfall, Gabriel took a small step, just enough to hear better without breaking the distance. What is a seal? He asked. Isabel swallowed, carefully took out the medallion, and covered it with her hand so that the glint wouldn't be noticeable from the doorway. This is what she said. Gabriel looked at it as if it were a dangerous key. He didn't take it right away. "Where did you find it?" he asked without raising his voice. "In the drinks area," Isabel replied. "Last night." Then Gabriel clenched his jaw. "After Don Gaspar sent you to your room," he murmured, guessing. Isabel nodded. "He followed me, saw me there, and hinted that if I was hiding something, I'd better get rid of it," she said. Gabriel held Isabel's gaze. In that silence, there was a decision. "Why didn't you tell me this morning?" he asked. Isabel pressed her lips together. "Because I didn't know if I could," she said honestly. "And because if I said something and no one believed me, the medallion would become my fault." Gabriel finally reached out his hand. "Give it to me," he asked. Isabel handed it to him, feeling as if she were giving him a piece of her skin. Gabriel turned it over carefully. "This is from a noble house," he said, and his voice became a little harder. "Not from the service." Isabel felt a strange relief. His confirmation made her feel less crazy. "I recognized it by the symbol," Isabel confessed. "I've seen it on letters that arrive in certain hands." Gabriel looked up and asked, "What hands?" Isabel took a deep breath. "This is where lives are broken. I can't say without him killing me," she said, her voice breaking. "But I can tell you this. Last night was no accident. They changed the shift list. A new footman served the toast, and someone wanted that glass to reach you." Gabriel stared at her without blinking. "And you prevented it," he said. Isabel looked down. "I alone," she began, but forced herself to continue. "I noticed something strange. I saw the cloth. I saw the rush, and I understood everything." Gabriel held the medallion in his closed hand. "Who was the footman?" he asked. "I don't know him," Isabel replied, "and I haven't seen him today. He disappeared." Gabriel exhaled slowly. "Then he wasn't from the palace," he murmured. "Or they hid him well." Isabel clutched the edge of her apron. "Your Highness," she said, her voice trembling for the first time, "if that note has come into my hands, it's because they know I was the one who took it. And if they know that, they'll take everything away from me. My job, my home, my name." Gabriel held the medallion and placed it on the table, covering it with the book as if it would protect it. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "No one is going to take you out of the palace without going through me." Isabel looked up, surprised. "What?" she asked, without thinking why he would get involved like this. Gabriel was silent for a second. It was not a silence of doubt, but of caution. "Because I owe you my life," he said finally, without embellishment. "And because if I allow them to destroy you, then what I am is worthless." Isabel felt a blow to her chest. A thank you came out, but she swallowed the word. She didn't want to owe him any more, but if he protected her too much, people would talk. They would make things up. "They're already talking," Gabriel replied. Isabel looked down, embarrassed without knowing why. Gabriel rested his hand on the table, near the book, without touching her. "Today, Doña Elvira looked at me as if I had done something wrong," he said. "And that means she's going to use it." Isabel felt the name like a thorn. She murmured, "She told me that attention comes at a price." Gabriel raised an eyebrow. "She told you that?" he asked. And for the first time, there was a flash of real annoyance. Isabel nodded. "Yes," she replied. Gabriel took a deep breath, as if controlling himself. "Good," he said, his voice returning to calm. "Then let's do this right. No scandals, no making a scene." Isabel looked at him, confused. Gabriel spoke with precision. "First," he said, "you stay in the prince's wing formally. Not as a favor, but as a registered assignment. That means your roof becomes my business." Isabel swallowed. "And Don Gaspar?" Gabriel shook his head. "Don Gaspar no longer has control over your shift," he said. "He's already losing it. Matilda's strict, but she's not one of us." Isabel felt a little relief. "Second," Gabriel continued, "you are not going to respond alone to this note they left you. If they want the medallion, they will have to come closer. And if they come closer, they will leave a trace." Isabel pressed her lips together. "What if they don't come closer?" she asked. "They will move in another way," Gabriel replied. "But every movement leaves a trace, and you have eyes." Isabel remained silent. That "you have eyes" felt like both recognition and a burden. "I don't want to be a pawn," she said at last, with a courage that trembled in her voice. Gabriel stared at her. "Then don't be one," he replied. "Tell me what you want." Isabel felt the words choke her. "I want," she said and swallowed. "I want to live without fear. I want them to stop pointing at me like I'm trash. I want to sleep again." Gabriel looked down for a moment, as if those words weighed heavily on him. "That's fair," he said. Isabel let out a small, bitter laugh. "Fair doesn't exist for people like me," she replied. Gabriel looked up. "I'm going to make it exist," he said firmly, as if it were an order. Isabel felt the air fill with something dangerous. Hope. The guard at the door shifted slightly, remembering that there were witnesses. Gabriel noticed and lowered his voice even more. "Third," he said, "I need you to tell me everything you saw, without guessing anything." Isabel. She took a deep breath. "I saw the list changed," she began. "Inez told me. They moved her from drinks to desserts and put in a new footman." Gabriel nodded attentively. "Inez is trustworthy?" he asked. Isabel hesitated, and that hurt him. "She's good," she said, "but she's afraid." "Then don't involve her more than necessary," Gabriel replied. Isabel continued. "I saw the footman serve," she said. "He used a cloth on the neck of the bottle, too carefully, as if he didn't want to touch it with his hand, and the wine smelled bitter. It didn't seem like wine." Gabriel clenched his jaw. "Who else was nearby?" he asked. "Don Gaspar appeared right after and spoke to him," Isabel said. Then the footman disappeared. Gabriel barely nodded. "And Doña Elvira?" Isabel felt her chest tighten. "She was watching," she said. "She didn't come to the party, to me, to anyone." Gabriel was silent for a moment. "That's enough to start with." Isabel looked down and then forced herself to take out the folded note. And this is what she said, unfolding it. Gabriel took it, read it quickly, and his gaze hardened. "They want to scare you," he murmured. "They succeeded," Isabel confessed shamelessly. Gabriel looked up. "Fear doesn't make you less," he said. "It makes you alive." Isabel swallowed. She wasn't used to anyone talking to her like that. Gabriel folded the note and tucked it next to the locket under the book. "Now listen," he said, his voice becoming very calm. "You're not going to reply to that letter, not on your own. If anyone comes looking for you, tell me." Isabel pressed her lips together. "What if they corner me?" she asked. Gabriel stared at her. "Then you say this?" "Sis," he replied, "I am under the prince's orders only, and you keep quiet." Isabel felt a chill. "That will rile them up," he said. "They're already fired up," Gabriel replied. "What will change is that now they'll know you're not alone." Isabel looked down, and for a moment, exhaustion overwhelmed her. It wasn't physical exhaustion, but exhaustion of the soul. A phrase she hadn't planned slipped out. "And why should I care if they believe me?" she murmured. "In the end, they're still going to look at me as if I'm worthless." Gabriel remained still. Isabel said, and pronouncing his full name made him feel different. "They look at you that way because it suits them, not because it's true." Isabel looked up unintentionally and found herself looking into eyes that did not measure her by her rank. "You don't know me," she said defensively. Gabriel let out a short exhale. "I know you in essence," he replied. "Last night, while everyone was toasting, you did the opposite of what the world demanded of you. You didn't shrink back." Isabel clutched her apron. "My hands were shaking," she confessed. "And yet you did it anyway," said Gabriel. Isabel felt her face flush and forced herself to look down. "Your Highness," she said, trying to return to safe ground. "If this is discovered, they will attack you too. They will say that you allow yourself to be manipulated by a maid." Gabriel looked at her calmly. "Let them say it," he replied. "I know what I saw." Isabel swallowed. She wanted to ask him what exactly he had seen, but she didn't dare. Gabriel took a step back, restoring the distance required by protocol. "Mathilde will receive a written order," he said. "Your reassignment is sealed today." Isabel nodded. "And as for the rumors," Gabriel added, "there will always be those who try to make up stories about you, about your origins, about your decorum." Isabel lowered her gaze. They already do, she murmured. Gabriel held Isabel's gaze as if he wanted to drive a truth into her chest. When they do, he said, don't defend yourself with screams. Defend yourself with firmness. Isabel let out a brief, incredulous laugh. Firmness, she repeated. I was taught to bow my head. Then unlearn it, Gabriel said. Isabel remained silent. That word, unlearn, left her trembling inside. The guard moved again, remembering the past. Gabriel noticed. You may return, Gabriel said more formally. Isabel took a step, but stopped. Your Highness, she said, her voice coming out lower than expected. I didn't do this for you to see. I just did it. Gabriel interrupted her gently. I know, he said. That's why I care. Isabel felt a lump in her throat that really hurt. What if I can't take it? She asked, almost in a whisper. Gabriel looked at her with something that wasn't pity. Then I'll bear it with you, he said. She quickly lowered her head as if that sentence were too intimate to utter in a library with witnesses, even though no one had heard her. Go, Gabriel said, his tone careful. And remember, you are not alone. Isabel left with a tight chest and a firm step. The hallway seemed shorter, or perhaps she was different. When she returned to the service area, Mathilde was waiting for her with her arms crossed and asked her directly, what did His Highness want? Isabel measured each word. He wanted to confirm the toast protocol, she replied. Mathilde looked at her as if she knew that wasn't the whole truth. That's all. Isabel held her gaze. That's all I can say, ma'am. Mathilde exhaled and then gestured toward the Dequest. Then sign here, she said. Isabel blinked. Sign here, Mathilde said, pushing a piece of paper toward her. Mathilde pushed a piece of paper toward her. Your reassignment, she explained. It arrived a moment ago with an official stamp. It's not a whim, it's an order. Isabel felt a relief that almost made her dizzy. Thank you, she murmured without thinking. Mathilde looked at her harshly. Don't thank me, she said. Do your job, and if they come looking for you, tell me. Yes, ma'am. Inés appeared shortly after, her eyes red from having endured fear all day. What happened? Isabel whispered. She took her to a corner where they could barely breathe. I don't have the medallion anymore, she confessed in a low voice. I gave it to him. Inés opened her eyes wide. To the prince, Isabel nodded. And they assigned me here as an officer, she added. It's sealed now. Inés exhaled as if she could finally breathe. Then, maybe, don't count your chickens, Isabel said softly. This is just the beginning, but I'm no longer in the dark. Inés pressed her lips together. And you, are you okay? Isabel thought for a second. I'm awake, she replied, and that's dangerous. Inés looked at her and for the first time saw not only fear, but something new. Isabel whispered, when those above look at you like that, it usually ends badly. Isabel held her friend's gaze. This time she said nothing. That night, the prince's wing was filled with a different kind of tension. There were no shouts or blows, only glances that measured everything, and whispers that stopped when Isabel passed by. A young maid brushed against her as she passed and blurted out, almost without meaning to, there goes the favorite, and Isabel stopped and looked at her calmly. I'm no one's favorite, said Clara. I'm an employee, and I work. The maid blushed and quickly walked away. Inés exhaled. That was brave, she murmured. It was necessary, Isabel corrected her. Later, Mathilde gathered the staff. Starting today, she announced, the order of drinks in the prince's wing will change. No one from general service will enter this pantry without my permission. No one. And if anyone asks for Isabel, they must ask me first. A footman raised his hand. You ordered that, Mathilde replied, lifting her chin. The seal ordered it, he replied, and the seal is not to be questioned. Isabel felt the palace shift a millimeter in her favor. It wasn't complete justice, but it was a respite. At the end of the day, when the hallway was empty, the same protocol guard who had taken her to the library approached her. Isabel, he said, his tone neutral. His Highness sends this. He handed her a small piece of paper that was different from the threat. It was not an order, but a brief note written in firm handwriting. Isabel opened it with her heart racing. Today, you chose the truth. Don't let them make you doubt tomorrow. Isabel closed her eyes for a moment, not to dream but to steady herself. She tucked the note into her apron, where the threat had been, and felt something inside her settle like a promise. When she returned to the room and sat down on the cot, Ines looked at her from hers. "What are you going to do now?" she asked quietly. Isabel took a deep breath. "Work, keep quiet when appropriate, speak when necessary, and never bow her head out of habit again." Ines swallowed, and a moment later, Isabel fell silent, clutching the paper in her hand. "He looked at me as if I were someone," she said at last, "and it scattered me as if that gave him fear and hope at the same time." Isabel turned off the lamp. In the darkness, for the first time in days, her breathing was not a struggle, and yet she did not feel naive, but prepared. The morning arrived with a strange silence, as if the palace were holding its breath. Isabel was already awake when Mathilde opened the door to the service area of the prince's wing. "I don't want you to be slow today," Mathilde said bluntly. "I don't want you to be distracted today. Today I want you to be precise." Isabel nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Inez appeared behind her, adjusting her apron. "What's going on today?" she whispered, approaching Isabel. Matilda heard her and answered herself. "Reception in the small hall. Important houses are coming. People are coming who believe they rule over the walls." Inez swallowed hard. Isabel felt her stomach tighten, but she didn't let it show. "And us? What about us?" asked Inez. "We serve," said Matilda, "and you two, more than anyone else, are going to walk as if you had no heart." Inez looked at Isabel for strength. Isabel squeezed her wrist lightly with a quick gesture. "Breathe," Isabel said softly. "Do what you know." Mathilde clicked her tongue. "If you're going to talk, do it with your mouth closed." "Get to work," she said. The movement of the service became a measured dance. Plates, glasses, cloths, lists with stamps. Isabel noticed that there were more protocol guards near the drink tables today, but it wasn't an open threat. It was a presence that said, "The right thing is done here, by force if necessary." At noon, a messenger arrived in the service area with a note from Mathilde. Matilda opened it, read the message, and looked at Isabel as if she found it hard to admit. "Her Highness wants you assigned to the drinks table in the smaller hall," she said. Inez's eyes widened. She couldn't help herself. Matilda lifted her chin. "Yes, her," she repeated, and her tone made it clear that there was no discussion. "And you, Inez, go with her." Inez blinked. "I will," said Mathilde, "so that no one faints and so that they don't make up stories. The two of you together in plain sight, no nonsense." And Isabel felt her heart pounding. "Why today?" she asked, measuring her voice. Mathilde pressed her lips together. "Because today everything that needs to be clarified will be clarified," she replied. "And because if anyone dares to point the finger at you, they'll do it in front of witnesses." Inez approached Isabel in a corner. "This sounds like a trap," she whispered. Isabel didn't want to lie to her. "It sounds like exposure," she said, "but it also sounds like the end." Inez quickly crossed herself. "Let it be the end. Good," she whispered. Isabel pressed her lips together. "Let it be the end," she corrected. In the afternoon, before the guests arrived, a protocol guard approached Isabel. "Isabel," he said respectfully, "Her Highness asks if you are ready." Isabel straightened up. "I'm ready," she replied, not knowing if it was true. The guard nodded and walked away. Inez let out a breath. "She's asking you," she whispered. "You." Isabel looked at her. "We're not invisible today," she said. "That's scary," confessed Inez. "Yes," agreed Isabel, "but it also presents an opportunity." The smaller hall filled up quickly. It wasn't the grand banquet, but it was the place where deals were made, with smiles and reputations were destroyed with a comment. Isabel noticed this by the way the nobles positioned themselves, close to those who suited them and far from those who smelled of danger. Mathilde stood near the service area, watching everything. Isabel and Inez stayed at the drink station with 2 trays ready and glasses lined up. Inez spoke without turning around. "Here comes Doña Elvira," she whispered. Isabel felt the name like a stone, but she didn't change her pace. "Serve as usual," she said. "And Don Gaspar?" asked Inez. Isabel barely moved her head to one side. "There," she said, "Don Gaspar." He was standing near a column, his posture impeccable, as if nothing that had happened affected him. He greeted people with short bows and smiled with measured humility at those who had titles. And when he turned toward the service area, the smile faded, as if the service area didn't deserve air. Doña Elvira appeared with her fan and her icy calm. Her gaze swept across the room, lingered for a moment on the drinks table, and paused just a little longer than necessary on Isabel. Isabel looked down, but she noticed the gaze. Doña Elvira approached with the light step of someone who never tires. She greeted Mathilde as if she were just another piece of furniture, but a useful one. "Ma'am," Mathilde replied with a precise bow. Doña Elvira turned to Isabel and smiled sweetly. "So you're the one serving here now," she said. Isabel bowed her head. "I'm a sign-in, ma'am." "How proper," murmured Doña Elvira. "I'm glad when the staff understands their place." Isabel did not reply. She poured a glass of water for a gentleman nearby with steady hands. Doña Elvira approached without losing her smile. "I hope there will be no dizziness today," she said, as if commenting on the weather. Isabel looked up just enough. "If we follow protocol, you won't know," she replied calmly. Doña Elvira blinked, surprised by the firmness of her response. Then she closed her fan with a slight snap. "How interesting," said a maid who spoke as if she had a voice. Isabel lowered her head again. "I'm just repeating what I was taught, ma'am." Doña Elvira walked away, but her presence left a trail of polite menace. Inés exhaled. "She wanted to bite you," she whispered. "Let her bite," Isabel said softly. "There are bigger teeth at the table today." "The prince?" Inés asked, the word coming out like a secret. Isabel didn't answer because just then the murmur in the room changed. His Highness's voice was heard, and bodies shifted. Gabriel entered unhurriedly with that calmness he commanded effortlessly. He didn't need to raise his voice for everyone to understand that his presence was the norm. Doña Elvira approached him with a broad smile. "Prince Gabriel," she said, bowing her head. "What an honor, Doña Elvira," he replied courteously. "How punctual." She let out a short laugh. "I always take care of what matters," she said. Gabriel looked at her for a second. "I hope so," he replied, and continued walking. Isabel felt her chest tighten, not because he was looking at her, but because he was there, and everything could fall apart today. Gabriel stood near the center, talking to an advisor and a couple of nobles. The conversation seemed light, but Isabel saw the papers moving on a side table. It wasn't a party, it was a stage. Matilda approached Isabel without looking directly at her. "Now," she whispered, "hang in there. What's going to happen?" Inés asked, her voice almost gone. Matilda didn't answer, she just clenched her jaw. An advisor raised his hand to ask for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "His Highness wishes to share a few words about good order in the palace." The murmuring subsided. The glasses were settled into gloved hands. Gabriel spoke in a clear, unadorned voice. "This house is sustained by trust," he said. "And trust is sustained by order. When order is disrupted, even with a smile, the palace becomes ill." Doña Elvira kept smiling, but she felt her fingers tighten around her fan. Gabriel continued, "Recently we had an incident that some wanted to call clumsiness. I do not call clumsiness what arises from an unregistered change." A murmur ran through the room. Don Gaspar sat up straight, alert. Gabriel turned slightly toward the advisor. "Bring it," he ordered. The advisor signaled to an assistant. He signaled to an assistant. The assistant left and returned with a small, closed wooden box. Isabel felt her hands go dry. Inés looked at her, pale. Isabel whispered, "Don't say anything." The advisor opened the box on the side table. Inside was a brooch or medallion. Isabel recognized it immediately. The seal glowed faintly, but enough. Doña Elvira blinked once, slowly. Gabriel lifted the medallion without drama. "This appeared in the drink circuit," he said. "It doesn't belong to the service. It belongs to a noble house." The nobles looked at each other, uncomfortable. Doña Elvira spoke sweetly. "Prince Gabriel, in a large palace, things get lost all the time," she said. "How alarmist would it be to think that a lost object means something more?" Gabriel looked at her without smiling. "A lost object?" "No," she replied. "A seal in the exact place, on the exact day, with a change shift list." And Don Gaspar stepped forward. "Your Highness," he said respectfully, "I did not authorize anything outside of protocol." Gabriel nodded. Then I'm glad you said it in front of witnesses, replied the advisor, who took a piece of paper. We have records, he said as he read. The shift list was modified at an unusual time. A young nobleman raised an eyebrow and asked with an interest that smacked of gossip. And who modified it? The advisor did not yet respond. He looked at Gabriel. Gabriel raised his hand. Before names, and he said, a simple question, Don Gaspar. Who served the wine for the toast? Don Gaspar swallowed. An assigned footman, he replied without specifying his name. His name, Gabriel insisted without raising his voice. Don Gaspar clenched his jaw. I don't remember, he said. A murmur ran through the room. A senior butler who couldn't remember the names of his staff was not credible, but in the palace, credibility could be bought. Doña Elvira intervened. Perhaps Don Gaspar is nervous from so many questions at a reception, she said with a smile. It's not good to dampen the mood. Gabriel looked at her directly. What dampens spirits is lies, and I did not come here to please spirits. Doña Elvira closed her fan gently, but her gaze turned cold. The advisor continued. Furthermore, he said, there is a record of access to the drinks pantry signed by someone who is not on the regular payroll. The nobles leaned toward each other. An intruder, whispered a countess. A hired hand, murmured a marquis. Gabriel raised his voice just enough to be heard. I know, a false name, he said, and that falsehood does not enter without complicity. Don Gaspar tensed. Your Highness, he said harshly, this is a serious accusation. Gabriel looked at him calmly. What is serious is playing with the stability of the palace, he replied. And with my table, Doña Elvira said, placing a hand dramatically on her chest. How offensive, said Dulce. No one is playing with you. Gabriel turned to the advisor. Read the second part, he ordered. The advisor took another piece of paper. There is a note addressed to an employee in the service area of the prince's wing, he said, reading. The note demands the return of the seal before nightfall, with the threat of dismissal. A murmur ignited like a spark. Doña Elvira did not change her smile. She only blinked more slowly. Don Gaspar clenched his fists. A nobleman uttered a threat. Here. How vulgar, said a scandalized lady. Gabriel raised his hand and the murmur subsided. In this house, power is not shown with threats, but with laws. And anyone who thinks they can intimidate the staff to cover up an unauthorized change does not understand what it means to serve the kingdom. Isabel felt her chest heaving. The advisor had read the note without saying her name, but it was clear they were talking about her. Eyes began to search for her like dogs sniffing. Inés brushed her elbow without turning around. They're looking for you, she whispered. Isabel kept her hands on the tray. Let them look, she murmured. I'm here. Doña Elvira raised her voice. Prince Gabriel, she said, if you are using an employee as the focus of your speech, that is also questionable. Gabriel slowly turned toward her. Is it questionable to protect staff from threats, he asked? Or is it questionable for an employee to have the misfortune of seeing what she shouldn't? Doña Elvira smiled as if it were a duel of courtesy. How sensitive, she said. Sensitivity can be dangerous in a ruler. Gabriel took a step toward the side table and placed the medallion next to the papers. What's dangerous is manipulation, he replied. It's time to put an end to it. The advisor looked at an assistant. The assistant left and returned with a nervous-looking man, a minor clerk, someone from the office, not the hall. His hands were sweaty. What is he doing here? Asked a nobleman with disgust. The advisor spoke. This clerk had been ordered to modify the shift list. He said, and he has a record of who gave him the instruction. Don Gaspar turned pale. That's absurd. That's absurd, he blurted out. I didn't give any orders. The clerk swallowed and looked at the floor. Sir, he stammered. Gabriel raised a hand. Speak, he ordered, and his voice was not cruel, just firm. The clerk trembled. I was given a piece of paper with a seal, he said. A seal and a name that I assumed were valid. What seal? Asked the counselor. The clerk looked up slightly and pointed with his chin. The one from the Montiano house, he said, and swallowed hard. The one from the Montiano house? The room froze. Doña Elvira didn't move, but her smile hardened. How insolent, she whispered. Are you accusing me of something, clerk? The clerk almost collapsed. I'm not accusing her, he said. I'm just saying what I saw. It was his seal. Doña Elvira slowly opened her fan. There are many forged seals, she said, looking around as if searching for allies. Anyone can use a symbol to tarnish a name. An elderly nobleman nodded. That's true, Gabriel murmured, intervening. That's why we don't just rely on a piece of paper. The advisor held up another document. There is proof of delivery of a bag of coins to the scribe for urgent business, he said, and the signature matches that of an assistant close to Doña Elvira. Doña Elvira stopped smiling for the first time. It was only for a second, but it was enough. They're going too far, she said, and her voice no longer sounded sweet. Gabriel looked at her calmly. They're revealing themselves, he corrected. Doña Elvira straightened up. Prince Gabriel, she said, if you insist on this spectacle, you will make enemies. Gabriel bowed his head. The enemies were already there, he replied. Only now they can be seen. Don Gaspar took a desperate step. Your Highness. I was only following orders. As he said this, he bit his lip as if he had betrayed himself. The room breathed as if someone had released the rope. Gabriel looked at him without compassion or cruelty. Whose? He asked simply. Don Gaspar closed his eyes for a moment. His pride fought against his fear. Doña Elvira looked at him as if she could pierce him with her gaze. Don Gaspar, she said, and her voice was a warning. Don Gaspar swallowed, trembling. He began and couldn't continue. Gabriel did not shout, he just waited. That silence was worse than any scolding. The advisor cleared his throat. Enough, he said, and looked at Doña Elvira with cold formality. For reasons of palace security, Doña Elvira is requested to withdraw from her supervisory duties and dealings with the staff until the origin of the seal and payments can be verified. A nobleman let out a stifled, "Oh!" Doña Elvira clutched her fan. Am I being removed? She asked incredulously, as if the world could not reach her. Gabriel spoke calmly. You are being asked not to interfere, he said. If your name is cleared, you will return. If not, the palace will be cleaned up without you. Doña Elvira looked at him with contained hatred, but she hid it with a forced smile. How convenient, she muttered. They are pushing me aside in front of everyone to humiliate me. Gabriel held her gaze. You humiliate yourself, he replied. Today you have only been given a mirror. Doña Elvira closed her fan tightly and turned away stiffly. Two protocol assistants approached to accompany her without touching her, without violence, only with their presence. As she passed the drinks table, her gaze lingered on Isabel for a moment. It was a look that promised social damage, but it was also a look that was defeated for the first time. She no longer had absolute control. Isabel did not lower her head. Doña Elvira left. The atmosphere in the room changed as if someone had opened a window. The advisor looked at Don Gaspar. You are removed from the main service from this moment on, he said. Don Gaspar turned red. This is unfair, he blurted out, forgetting for a second where he was. The advisor looked at him coldly. What is unfair is threatening the staff, he replied, and tampering with lists with other people's seals. Don Gaspar clenched his jaw, but he no longer had any power. He lowered his gaze, stepped aside, and swallowed his anger. Gabriel took a deep breath and then did something no one expected. He walked over to the drinks area. Isabel, he said. The name rang out like a bell in the room. Inés tensed up so much that she almost dropped her jug. Isabel felt her legs give way, but she held on. She took 2 steps forward with perfect protocol. She bowed her head. His Highness pierced her with his gaze. There was curiosity, judgment, surprise, and something new. Forced respect. Gabriel spoke in a firm voice, as if declaring something inevitable. This employee, he said, did what many here would not dare to do. Observe, decide, and act with loyalty without expecting reward. A nobleman muttered something. Gabriel raised his hand and the murmur died down. There was a change in the drink order, he continued, and she noticed it. Her prudence prevented the palace from being embroiled in further embarrassment. Isabel felt her eyes burning, but she did not cry. Not in front of them. Gabriel looked at her for a moment, and his gaze was not that of a prince, but of someone who was grateful. Isabel, he said, his voice barely lowering, why did you do it? The room fell silent. The breath. That question was dangerous because if Isabel answered wrong, they could use it against her. If she answered too humbly, they could crush her with condescension. If she answered proudly, they could call her insolent. Isabel took a deep breath. Because it smelled bad, she said first, simply, provoking small, nervous laughs. Then she looked up just enough for them to really hear her. And because I saw hands that shouldn't have touched what was hers, she added, I don't have a title, Your Highness, but I do have eyes. And last night those eyes told me that to remain silent would be to betray him. There was a heavy silence, but it was not hostile, rather respectful. An elderly nobleman nodded slowly. Brave, he murmured. Gabriel held Isabel's gaze and took a small step toward her, mindful of protocol. You took a risk knowing that no one would defend you, he said. Isabel swallowed hard. Yes, she replied without embellishment. Gabriel turned and looked around the room. Then let it be clear, in this palace, loyalty is not measured by surname, but by actions. Some nobles shifted uncomfortably at the idea. Others nodded as it suited them to improve their image. Gabriel continued without giving them time to settle in and added, Isabel remains under my formal protection. A murmur spread through the room. Protection, said a lady. Formal, city, repeated a gentleman, as if he sensed scandal. Gabriel raised his hand. Formal, he reiterated. Registered assignment, guaranteed housing, and increased salary based on merit, not whim. The counselor nodded as if it had already been agreed upon. Doña Elvira was no longer there to contradict him. Don Gaspar was no longer able to. Inez looked at Isabel with eyes full of tears she didn't dare let fall. Matilda, in the back, kept her face stone cold, but Isabel saw a slight gleam in her eyes. Approval. Gabriel took another step, keeping within the correct distance, and spoke in a voice that only Isabel perceived as intimate, even though the entire room heard him. Now I'm going to say something that will make many more people uncomfortable than any seal. Isabel felt her heart rise. Gabriel turned to the advisor. I have already requested the necessary permission, he said, and I have it. The advisor raised a document with the royal seal and nodded. The room tensed like a string. Gabriel looked at Isabel again. Isabel Rojas said, Your courage saved my honor and my life. And since then, I have not been able to look at this palace without thinking that you deserve something that is denied here to those who work. Complete respect. Isabel felt the air leave her. Your Highness, she whispered, but could find no words. Gabriel held her gaze with a calmness that seemed like a promise. I will not ask you to be less so that others may be comfortable, he said. I will not hide you to avoid rumors. A murmur grew, but Gabriel cut it off with his presence. I will ask you directly, he continued, with witnesses, with honor, as it should be. Isabel felt her hands trembling, but she did not hide. Gabriel lowered his voice slightly, as if he had chosen to speak to her among everyone else. Will you be my wife? He asked. The room fell silent. Inez let out a small gasp. Matilda closed her eyes for a moment, as if she had finally said yes. Isabel felt the world spinning, but not from fear, rather from disbelief and tenderness. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Gabriel didn't rush her. He just looked at her patiently, as if he knew that this question offered her life, but also put her under a relentless spotlight. Isabel swallowed. You started it, she said in a low voice. You don't have to do this. Gabriel didn't smile, but his gaze softened. Yes, I do, he replied. Because I want to, because I admire you, because you reminded me that power without conscience is just a mask. Isabel felt her eyes well up. I don't have a surname for you, she said, her voice breaking. I don't have a dowry. I have nothing. Gabriel interrupted her gently. You have dignity, you have courage, and you have an honesty that is rare here, he said. That is more than any dowry. The room murmured, divided between scandal and excitement, but no one dared interrupt the prince. Isabel took a deep breath and looked around. Those faces that had previously ignored her now evaluated her as if she were a rumor with legs. Then she looked at Gabriel and saw him not as a title, but as a man who had decided not to let her down. What if you regret it tomorrow? Isabel blurted out, sincerely unable to stop herself. What if this becomes a punishment for you? Gabriel replied, holding her gaze steady. If tomorrow someone punishes me for choosing you with honor, that punishment only proves that this palace needs to change, and I am ready to change it, he said. Isabel felt that phrase settle something inside her, as if her fear finally had a place to sit and be quiet. Inez clasped her hands together, praying silently. Mathilde took a tiny step, as if wanting to protect the space without touching it. Isabel straightened her back, not out of pride, but out of determination. Yes, she said at last, her voice clear. Yes, I accept. A sigh swept through the room like a wind. Gabriel closed his eyes for a moment, as if relieved. Then he opened his hand and took out a simple, dignified ring without excess. It was not a flashy diamond, but an honest symbol of what they were doing. He held it at the appropriate height. Isabel calmly held out her hand, as if the world were not shaking. Gabriel placed the ring on her finger carefully, respecting protocol, but with a tenderness that was evident in his gesture. Then Gabriel said, looking at the room, "It is done." The advisor raised his voice. "By order and permission, the engagement is formalized," he announced, "and the date of the union is set according to the regulations." Some nobles applauded politely, and others just nodded, swallowing their pride. No one dared to insult them, not on that day. Inez exhaled as if she were finally alive. Matilda moved a little closer, just enough for Isabel to see her. "You earned it," Matilda whispered, barely audibly. Isabel felt her throat tighten. "I just—" Matilda interrupted her. "Be quiet," she said. "Don't back down today." Isabel nodded and treasured that advice. Gabriel raised his hand again. "One more thing," he said, addressing the room. "This matter is not settled with just a ring." The advisor nodded. "Changes to protocol will be reviewed, and threats to the service will be punished with dismissal and expulsion from the palace." It was not violence, it was structural justice. Those who governed poorly lost their positions. Gabriel turned to Mathilde. "Mathilde," he said, "your order stands. The service will never again be anyone's plaything." Mathilde bowed her head. "Yes, Your Highness." Gabriel turned to where Inez was standing, trying to make herself smaller. "Inez," he called. "Inez." She almost fainted from nerves. She took a step forward and bowed her head. "Your Highness, thank you for supporting your friend when the palace did not," said Gabriel. Inez blinked, not knowing if she was allowed to. I just, she stammered. "That's enough," replied Gabriel. Isabel finally wanted to cry, but she held back, not out of shame, but because it was not the right moment. She wanted to remember everything. The reception continued for a while, as if the palace needed to feign normality after the extraordinary. But nothing was the same anymore. A young nobleman approached the advisor and said quietly, "This is going to be the talk of the town." The advisor replied curtly, "Let them talk. Today they have learned that service also has value." Later, when the guests began to leave, Gabriel asked for an adjoining room with the doors ajar and two witnesses at a distance, not to hide, but to be able to breathe without the crowd on top of him. Isabel entered with a heavy ring on her finger, as if it did not belong to her. Gabriel looked at her, and for the first time, his expression softened. "Are you trembling?" he asked softly. Isabel let out a nervous laugh. "A little," she admitted. "I feel like I'm wearing borrowed clothes." Gabriel moved closer, respecting the distance. "This isn't borrowed, he said. "This is chosen." Isabel swallowed. "What if they hate me?" she asked sincerely. "What if they hate me? What if they make my life miserable?" Gabriel tilted his head. "Some will hate you," he replied, "because your existence reminds them that their power is not natural, but a habit." Isabel squeezed the ring with her fingers. "I don't want to be the cause of a salon war," she said. Gabriel let out a short exhale, almost a smile. "Then don't be," he said. "Be a reason for change calmly, firmly, with the same cool head with which you changed that glass." Isabel looked at him and was suddenly overcome with emotion. "I thought I was going to die in that hallway," she confessed in a low voice. "I thought they were going to kick me out, that I was going to sleep on the street." Gabriel stood still for a moment, as if those images hurt him. "No," he said firmly, "not while I'm breathing." Isabel felt her chest tighten. "What about you?" she asked. "Aren't you afraid of what people might say about you?" Gabriel looked at her as if the answer were obvious. I'm more afraid of becoming the kind of man who abandons the person who saved him. That would make me ashamed, he said. Isabel looked down and finally the tear escaped. I don't know how to be a princess, Gabriel murmured, moving a little closer, still proper, but closer. I'm not going to ask you to be a princess, he said. I'm going to ask you to be Isabel. The rest can be learned in the palace or left behind. Isabel let out a short laugh through her tears. That sounds like a threat, she said. Sounds like the truth, Gabriel replied. Isabel took a deep breath, trying to regain her voice. When you asked me why I did it, I answered as best I could. But there's something else. Gabriel waited. Isabel looked him in the eye for the first time without lowering her head. I did it because I saw your face when you raised your glass, Cherise, she said. I didn't see a man of marble. I saw someone alone among too many people. Gabriel was silent for a second. That's how I felt, he admitted. Isabel quickly wiped her tear with the back of her hand, as if she were still a maid and shouldn't show emotion. Gabriel noticed the gesture. Don't hide who you are, he said softly. Not with me, Isabel swallowed. Then don't hide what you feel either, she replied, the words coming out before she could stop them. Gabriel blinked, surprised, and then his gaze became honest. I've felt it from the first moment I saw you holding a tray, as if you were holding your destiny, he said. And I knew it was true when you didn't break down, even when they looked at you as if you didn't exist. Isabel felt her knees go weak, but she stood firm. I was nothing, she said softly. Gabriel shook his head. You were someone no one wanted to see, he corrected. And I was one of those people until you forced me to look. Isabel breathed shakily. I didn't force you, she said. Yes, you did, Gabriel replied. With your actions, with your courage, with your way of telling the truth without raising your voice. Isabel squeezed the ring. I don't know what will happen tomorrow, she confessed. Gabriel reached out his hand without taking hers yet, waiting for permission. Isabel placed it on top of his. It was a simple, permissible gesture, like a promise without scandal. Tomorrow we're going for a walk, Gabriel said. And if they look at you, let them look. But they won't look down on you without me seeing it. Isabel nodded, and for the first time in days, a small smile appeared on her face. So, can I sleep now? She asked, trying to joke. Gabriel let out a brief, restrained laugh. Yes, he said, and if you can't, tell me. Isabel looked at him, and suddenly everything she had been holding back turned to tenderness and burned in her chest. Thank you, she said at last, without fear of saying it, but not for the ring, for believing me. Gabriel squeezed her hand gently. Thank you, he replied, for saving me without asking for anything in return. Now it's my turn to give you something that can't be bought, a place where no one can erase you. Isabel felt the lump in her throat loosen, not because the world was perfect, but because she finally had a yes that sustained her. At the exit of the room, Mathilde was waiting for her with a stony face but attentive eyes. Your Highness, she said, bowing her head, the service is ready. Gabriel nodded. Good work, Mathilde. Mathilde looked at Isabel for a second and then whispered, barely audibly, Don't faint. Isabel let out an excited giggle. No, she said. Not anymore. Inés appeared behind her with shining eyes. Isabel, she whispered, and couldn't say anything else. Her voice broke. Isabel hugged her quickly and discreetly as the service corridor allowed. Thank you, Isabel murmured, for not letting go of me. Inés wiped her face with the back of her hand. I'll see you again, she said. Isabel took a deep breath. And you were there, she replied. Later in the corridor, a servant announced that Tomas, the assistant, was feeling better and had returned home with the recommendation to rest and with his job secured. Isabel closed her eyes for a moment, grateful. Gabriel looked at her. Does that reassure you? He asked. Yes, Isabel replied. She didn't want anyone to pay for something they didn't understand. Gabriel nodded. Today the palace learned something. What? Isabel asked. Gabriel looked at her calmly. Greatness is not found in a table laden with food, but in those who decide to do the right thing, even if no one rewards them. Isabel lowered her gaze but then raised it again without shame. And I learned something. What did you learn? Gabriel asked. Isabel squeezed the ring gently. That I wasn't born to be a shadow, she replied. And that love, if it is true, doesn't lock you in, it opens the door. Gabriel finally smiled without a mask. Then let's open it, he said. Isabel looked at him and felt that life, the life that had almost been taken from her with a glass, was now returning to her in full, with a name, a roof over her head, and a future. And in that palace where so many lived on appearances, she understood something that remains in the heart of anyone who hears this story. Sometimes freedom does not come with noise, but with a small, brave decision and with the right hand holding you up when you finally dare to raise your head. Thank you very much for listening to this story to the end. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed telling it. We would love to hear your opinion. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you like most. Rate this story from 1 to 5. What score would you give it? If you liked it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a sign of support. That motivates us a lot to continue creating and sharing more stories of emotions and lessons. Before we say goodbye, we want to remind you that a recommendation for another exciting and charming story will appear on the final screen. If you want to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you again for being here. See you in the next story.